Did you see anything?
No, sir. I didn't see you playing with your dolls again.
Good!
These aren't ordinary men. They're...
It's the new Boba Fett Star Wars large-size action figure from Kenner.
Why, it's Luke and Obi-Wan and my favorite Chewie. They're all here.
This thing rules. The Sangaroos.
Oh, hey, what's up? I'm Brian Altano.
And I'm Max Scoville.
This is a show where we discuss something we love,
Unpack why we love it,
explain where it came from,
try to remember our first impressions of it,
share our weird stories about it,
maybe learn something new about it along the way.
but first and foremost, we're here to celebrate the fact that this thing rules.
This week's thing is action figures. What's so great about action figures?
You don't ever have to stop buying them. You can just buy them forever.
That's true of like any product. What that doesn't do anything. Like what?
Okay, what's so great about action figures? They are small representations of things you love that you can keep in your house, play with, pass on to children or hoard, and they bring you joy every time you look at them.
What's so great about action figures versus just figurines or statues?
They're interactive.
I mean, anything's interactive if you interact with it.
Okay. Well,
What is an action figure? Let's back this up. What defines an action figure? How would you describe an action figure?
Well, I would say historically they're sort of human shaped. I think that's how they kind of started, but they are articulated toys with usually, limbs, appendages that are movable and can be posed and interacted. And sometimes they have spring-loaded action features like a punch or a kick or a backflip or a jump, and they are really fun to collect and own. Like that's, I think that like the way I differentiate a toy from okay. I can tell you the difference between like a bust and a statue and an action figure, but action figures are toys, and I don't think that statues are toys, right?
Yes, that's fair to say.
Is that some rectangles or squares or some square that whole thing?
Yeah, I mean everything is a collectible if you collect it. That's a stupid word. I hate the term collectible, but like
I do too.
Yeah, some things are also designed like they're marketed for the sake of collecting. Like a lot of things you don't flip it over and it says collect them all, but action figures, that's sort of a defining characteristic. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Like action figures are, I think humanoid is a good go-to there. That's how it started out. Articulated figures, for lack of a better word, dolls, they've gone back for ages. Dolls were, they have been articulated longer than action figures have. There were also ones that are, there's like the porcelain dolls that I don't know how, like they're less of an emphasis on action, obviously, like depending on how you play with them, but again, that's entirely up to the user. The term action figure, I looked this up, the term action figure was first used to market the original 12-inch G.I. Joe, which was introduced by Hasbro in 1964. And this, that's like that's where you're like, how is this not a doll? And it's like, this is not a doll because we want boys to buy it. That's what it
exactly.
This is action. It's funny because let me go down a little wormhole here. I did some research this morning, but Hasbro licensed the G.I. Joe 12-inch figure to a company in the UK called Palitoy that started calling it Action Man, and then they licensed it to a Japanese company called Takara where it was called Action Joe. I feel like the action word got really emphasized in other territories where, obviously G.I. Joe really, really leaning hard on the sort of Americana there. So, trying to make that, globally more appreciated took some retooling. Takara took the G.I. Joe molds and tweaked them and retooled them and made what was called a cyborg henshin line in the early 70s, which was like these cool, retro looking, see-through cyborg dudes that were, again, 12-inch figures. And at the time, there was the oil crisis going on, so plastic was expensive, and making big 12-inch figures was tricky. And obviously, there's typically smaller households in Japan, or smaller homes in Japan than in America. So they got the clever idea to make smaller figures in sort of the same style, which led to the Microman Zone line, which then got scooped up by an American toy company called Mego, which was making these sort of G.I. Joe-esque clothed, articulated 8-inch figures based on stuff like Marvel superheroes. They scooped up
So
the 3 and
the
3.
Microman toys were 8 inches tall.
No. The company Mego made those 8-inch figures, and then they took the Microman figures and repurposed them as Micronauts, which were little 3 and 3/4-inch figures, little teeny guys, little teeny tiny guys, and they were successful. They got their own Marvel comic. They, I think they predated the sort of wave of like, you know, Reagan era deregulation and Saturday morning cartoons and over advertising that led to a lot of like really beloved properties, but that scale of figures would in turn sort of inspire Kenner to make the Star Wars figures from the original movie. Little 4-inch figures, you know, they are small enough that you can buy a lot of them. They're, you know, cheap enough to produce, cheap enough to sell. You can fit a lot of them in a backpack. That's the kind of thing that you wouldn't have been able to do with like a big 12-inch G.I. Joe figure. Mm-hmm. The G.I. Joe approach was like, you buy the doll, and then you buy like DLC, you buy like bonus packs, you buy like accessories and like outfits and stuff, which was funny because that's much more like the Barbie model. That is the
Barbie model.
Yeah. So like the idea of like action figures as like a plural, gotta collect them all approach, that really kind of came from, you know, Microman. But I think Star Wars gets a lot of credit for that. Hasbro would then kind of circle back and rebrand or, you know, reboot G.I. Joe as G.I. Joe: A Real American Hero in 1982 with the little 4-inch figures that had the rubber band guts where they could like flip their legs every which way, but they'd also like their torsos would break apart because they had like a rubber band holding them together.
Yeah. That was notorious for that line.
Yeah, had to do a lot of field surgery there.
A lot of like bringing a dead toy to your mom or dad and being like, "Ma, fix this."
Yeah. In 1991, Hasbro bought Kenner, which owned Star Wars. They rebooted Star Wars, you know, capitalized on nostalgia. Brought that whole thing back full circle, put out a whole bunch of 4-inch figures, 3 and 3/4 inch, whatever you want to call it. And now, fast forward, Hasbro currently makes 6-inch figures, which seems like a happy medium between all the above, that they do based on, you know, G.I. Joe, Star Wars, Marvel superheroes, among other things. And that's sort of, if you boil down the entire history of the action figure, it kind of landed on like 6-inch hyper-articulated collectible. That's, and you know, it's also kind of a waning thing in terms of popularity. Like action figures have had their golden age.
They
like,
did.
That was our childhood. Like we grew up with these. We love them. We're adults who still buy them. There are presumably still kids who still buy them. There are presumably still younger collectors and older collectors who are interested. But like, it was a sweet spot that was, you know, very much informed by like what was possible to do with like trade regulations and Saturday morning cartoons and how people consume media. Mm-hmm. And we love them for that very reason.
Yeah, I think that they were not necessarily like a product at the time, but also a byproduct of the limitations of the time. When Star Wars came out in theaters, you had that movie, and that was it. And then, you know, 3 years later, you had the sequel, and 3 years after that, you had another sequel. But if you were a kid and you wanted to, you know, experience the joy of those characters and the adventures that they were going on, you couldn't really open Disney Plus and rewatch the movie, you know, throw on the Blu-ray or whatever. You maybe had some like coloring books or some like sticker books and stuff like that. So you would buy toys, and your toys were your sort of way of bringing home a small part of that film and being able to recreate the adventures of it on your own. And the same went for Saturday morning cartoons, which, you know, went on TV and then disappeared. They didn't really like, you know, for a while they weren't on VHS, they weren't on DVD. You just watched them. And
well, it's funny because a lot of Saturday morning cartoons were based on toy lines, and some toy lines were based on Saturday morning cartoons. But there was like there was very much like an ecosystem there. It was a sort of, you know, long before the term transmedia got thrown around. But there was like, this was a, you know, multi-front merchandising assault on children, basically.
Yeah, and while you were watching Saturday morning cartoons, you would get you know, advertisements for other action figures. So you'd be holding your toys watching, you know, Thundercats, and then there'd be a commercial for Ghostbusters or whatever it is, right? You know, my timelines are a little screwy there, but that was a big part of it, was being able to take those things home. And I think that like, it's really interesting because the Barbie approach doesn't really work for that, because Barbie is Barbie, right? And then there's Ken, and you can get other Barbies and you can get other Kens, but for the most part, like, she's the star of her show. Whereas G.I. Joe and Transformers and Ghostbusters, Ninja Turtles especially, like Ninja Turtles and Ghostbusters, to me, it was like, and Thundercats, it's like, these are teams of 4 or 5. You don't want one of them. You want all 5 of them. And if you have all 5 of them or all 4 of them, right, then they need to beat some people up, or they need a leader, or they need a April O'Neil or a Splinter, or they need a, like a Janine.
Yeah.
It's just like...
Who's going to answer their phone calls?
Exactly. Someone's got to send them out and figure out. Otherwise, they're going to have to answer the call themselves. And so little by little, as a kid, you would slowly start to amass like a small collection. Maybe you'd get a couple from each line. And where things got really interesting there was that you would start to combine them and play with them all together. And I recognize that this is a thing that kids do not really do a lot anymore. Although when you go to a store like Target, and you walk through the action figure aisles, which you and I both do frequently, not just because we're parents now, but because that's a thing that's never really left, our patterns. You would think that things are still booming and things are still going well. And it's interesting because there are still a lot of toys, but the market feels very splintered. The scales feel very splintered. The idea of getting a bunch of toys that are kind of similar in size doesn't really happen anymore. But when I was a kid, we had something called a toy chest, which was just like a wooden box, doubled as a bench, and then me and my brother would open it up, and it was just full of toys. And you would just scoop in with your hands, grab a bunch, and create a bunch of adventures between G.I. Joes and Ninja Turtles and X-Men. And for me, like, the golden age was sort of like that right there. Like, it was, I talked about Ghostbusters and Thundercats, He-Man, some of my earlier experiences buying action figures. But I think when everything was sort of singing in synchronicity for me was like X-Men, Ninja Turtles, Aliens, Exo Squad. Like, that's when I was kind of like, I think I was old enough to understand it all. I was also old enough to kind of be like, to understand the economy of it and maybe like do chores around the house to like make money to be able to purchase it or whatever. And action figures were regularly like only like $5 back then. Like you could get an X-Men action figure for $5 from KB Toy Store, right? And like you said, you'd flip it over and you'd see 20 different characters on the back. And what I loved about that was like that was your entry point into an entire universe that you maybe didn't totally know. Like I knew a lot of characters on Ninja Turtles from the show, but there were also some in the comics. And in the same way, like I hadn't read all the X-Men comics, I'd seen some X-Men cards, but flipping over that box and seeing dozens of toys there, or even like the names of aliens in Star Wars that weren't explicitly named in the films was, not only something where you could bring those adventures home, it was a learning experience. Like you actually learned more about this world, this fantasy, like, entire interlocking system of ideas and concepts and films and TV shows and cartoons and cards and comics by looking at the action figures. It was a cheat sheet to tell you everything you needed to know about why this thing was cool. Sometimes he would even tell you like who the good guys were and who the bad guys were, right? Like there would be like their names would be in purple or green or whatever. It'd have a little kind of triangle in the corner being like, here's a skull. You'd rub on a battle beast's stomach and it would reveal a hologram showing its affinity for wood.
I never understood that whatsoever. That was
they were sort of in like secular religious cults based on weather, I guess. But yeah, it was the same thing with, Transformers is the easier example of that. Like you rub their tummy and it would be like, haha, you tickled me and I have to tell you I'm a Decepticon. Like action figures are awesome for that reason, because I think that like they added to the stories that we were learning about through one or several more mediums. They also taught us a lot about those places and those things. And they also gave us an opportunity to create our own adventures at home, which I don't think you get with like something like a video game or a book. You're sort of capped at what you're able to imagine reading a book or what you're able to perform playing a video game. But with action figures, you can do anything. And like, that was the limitless idea.
To go back what you're saying, like we're both post home video people.
Yeah.
Like we're both kids who were raised after the point where like there was a point where if you wanted to see Star Wars, you had to wait until it was in theaters. If you wanted to see a movie, you had to see it in theaters, because unless you had a Betamax player or like a 16 millimeter projector, like you didn't have a way of watching that at home. That was just not like home video was not a thing widely available for a cool minute. And like when we were growing up, it was like, that was the thing. You could rent movies if you wanted to. Stuff was on TV more often, I guess. It was a different time. And like, I never understood. It took me a very long time to realize this, but stuff like trading cards and official movie novelizations were meant, again, as a way to sort of keep the lights on in a particular fandom. until that thing made the rounds again. But that's another way that like Star Wars shook everything up, is that like up until, The Empire Strikes Back, like sequels weren't really seen as like super viable. Like they were seen as like typically it was, The Empire Strikes Back and The Godfather Part 2 that kind of like bucked that tradition of sequels being kind of a waste of time and money. Like they usually weren't super successful. They were, that was like a cash grab. That was they still are cash grabs, but like rarely do they maintain the quality of the first one. And it's also like, how do you keep people interested in a thing after it comes and goes from being in theaters? Like typically it was like, maybe a TV show could have sort of sustained interest in a product line, but like the idea of a movie coming out and kids continuing to buy toys until the next movie came out is like a totally revolutionary concept. And also kind of in hindsight, shocking that was something that they were able to figure out, like that even worked. Yeah. But what I love about it though is that when you have less information about these characters and creatures and this world, again, you fill in the blanks. Like it's kind of frustrating because now like so much of fandom and intellectual property is like dictated by what is official canon, like what's lore?
There's
what is
Wikipedia entries for every character, Wikipedia entries for every character, and that's like I think that's awesome in a certain way, but also it was sort of I think when there's enough left up to the imagination, it gets pretty interesting because like you hand a kid a toy based on a movie they saw, and maybe they do or don't remember that character, or you hand them a toy based on something they've never seen in their lives, which is a way I think that like. I got toys like that a lot as a kid. I would just walk into a store and see a toy that I really liked and, pull my dad's...
buy it because it was cool. It was like...
It looked cool, right? And you're like, I don't know what he's from or what he does. I don't know his powers or his story or if it's a bad guy or a good guy or whatever. Or you would find something at a yard sale or get a hand-me-down or something, and you would invent an entire story around it. And doing that allowed you to sort of be creative about it. And it's interesting because I have this a bit with my nephew now, where like he's gotten really into action figures over the last few years. He's like 6, and his dad will send me pictures of a toy he's playing with, and within a few minutes I'll see it and respond, and then I'll look it up myself to make sure I know I have the answer right, and I'll send him back the information. I'm like, this is his deal. He's got this and this and this. But I always make sure not to say too much, because like I think that like leaving some of that blank is really fun for a kid. And I've noticed that like my kid, and it's it's a product of her environment, and I'm sure yours is doing the same thing. We were action figure kids growing up. We were action figure grown-ups. Tons of toys in my house. I've always bought my kid toys. She's always like walked in and taken toys off the shelf in my office, or in our living room, wherever I've been able to sneak. Even when we were in a 1-bedroom apartment, I was sneaking action figures into certain corners. And so she grew up around them, and then she really likes playing with action figures now. She really likes playing with toys, to the point where it's really funny to bring this story full circle. She doesn't have a Ken doll, but she has a 12-inch tall Luke Skywalker on Hoth, who lost his shoes and his helmet, but he's blonde haired and he's got blue eyes, and he's a handsome enough man. He's wearing a parka or whatever, so it's weird to date a doll who she's regularly taking the clothes on and off of. But she came to me the other day and she was like, for my birthday, can I get a Ken doll? And I was like, Luke Skywalker needs a break, huh? And she's like, yeah, he needs a timeout. And I was like, sure, done. Aww. I'll handle it. Yeah. But so I think that's something that can be passed, but I do think that's what's really so cool about them, is that they were able to sustain stories for things that we weren't able to watch at home and keep going at home. And when the Saturday morning cartoons end at noon and they start playing, California Dreams or American Gladiator or whatever, which is your TV's way of going, go outside. You had your toys, and you could be like, I can keep these adventures going. And so I really appreciate them for that. I still buy them, that's totally. That's what's cool about it. It's like I still get excited. I still read about them. I still get excited about them. And what's interesting is over the last few years, there's been a bunch of people kind of like our age who have been like, I really, really loved this era. Like Brian Flynn over at Super 7, legendary modern toy creator who just really gets it. And he's dug into a lot of the old scales, the 3 3/4 and the 6-inch scale. And he's taken toys and he's been like, let's make a bunch of hip hop action figures in that old Kenner toy scale. So like that my Cantina aliens and my Bib Fortunas and Luke Skywalkers can stand next to my Rizzas and MF Dooms that he made. And he'll make 6-inch scale versions of like weird deep cut Ninja Turtle toys that we had when we were kids. And it's really interesting to see that kind of grow and glow up. At the same time, there's high-end toy companies that make 6-inch scale toys that are like $130. Like there's a new one for Tears of the Kingdom. I think it's a Figma, right?
Yep. And
it's like the deluxe version that comes with all the crap he can build in that game and all the bells and whistles and stuff like that is like it's like $120. And then it gets into like the high-end collector market, right? And
like
so
that's not the high-end collector market, Yeah, no. You get Hot Toys where you're getting the modern version of a original GI Joe, and it's $350 for a Mark IV Iron Man or whatever with die cast metal armor plating and a realistic Robert Downey Jr.
accurate
face.
Vin Diesel from Fast and the Furious.
No, it's crazy. Like the quality of stuff on like collector grade things is really impressive. And at the end of the day, they still are like they're scratching that same itch of what the toys were, where it's like people probably aren't playing with them, but they're like maybe posing them. Like toy photography is a big thing. People like, and again, like there's they're for children. Like toys are for they're a trivial, infantile hobby. Like they are childish. Like they're
meant to be opened and played with.
Little figurines based on like, and I think trying to put on airs about that and be like, no, it's not a comic book, it's a graphic novel. Like it's man, they're like action figures are action figures. Like, and I'm not going to try to like, I will romanticize it. I will get nostalgic and wax fondly about how like, how it does like, it spurred the imagination. But the entire idea of like action figures catching on is a direct result of, really clever marketing, and then subsequently Reagan deregulating marketing restrictions on advertising to children.
Yes.
Like up until the 1980s, it was like frowned upon for pretty obvious reasons to just put on Saturday morning cartoons that were effectively big fat ads for toys. They take a commercial break and show ads for said toys. Like that was, that was predatory for sure. Yeah.
See also Sunny Delight, which apparently has a hard alcohol version now, which is hilarious because that was predominantly marketed for children forever. And, Joe Camel.
Yeah, no, it's shameless, but like also, I don't know, we had a good time with those. Clearly something's wrong because we're still clinging to that corner of our childhood, but I guess they did a good enough job having it be fun that we're still like, hell yeah. A large Sentinel action figure that can fight my X-Men? Sure, why not? How much is it? Eek! Okay, never mind. But maybe I will. I don't know. I'll talk to my wife. You
and I sort of famously had we had a desk together at IGN at the old San Francisco office that was just like a wall of our toys combined. And we had this lovely, one of the nicest people in the world, this our sort of building manager, maintenance guy named Pablo. And he was like, you guys have a lot of toys. Can I buy you guys some shelves? And he bought us a bunch of basically like women's shoe shelves, shoe racks. And we just stacked them up and up and up. And we made this like 3-foot tall, 8-foot wide shrine of toys, and predominantly action figures. A lot of them were vintage, and a lot of them were things that companies would send us to show off on our Show Up at Noon or on Box on IGN and stuff like that. And so we amassed these collections, and
it was really easy in those times because that was all sort of relegated to work.
Yes.
And sometimes it was sort of work related, and sometimes it was fun, and sometimes it was like, I always think of like in The Rock, like Nicolas Cage is a Beatlemaniac, and so he orders his Beatles records, but he gets them delivered to work, so his wife doesn't yell at him,
Yeah,
and then he takes his record
exactly
home and
what we
listens
did.
to it. That was pretty much that, where it's like, oh boy, my new action figure arrived. Like if this showed up at the house, So the day that COVID hit, we had to pack up our desks and bring everything home in a carload or two, like it was a lot of boxes. That kind of reframed the entire process, and I've definitely pumped the brakes on like buying new toys, but I
Same.
still love them. And I also like we both have kids who are now playing with toys, and there's that changes things a little bit too, because now it's like now you're buying toys with a purpose. You're buying toys for an actual kid. What's your favorite action figure?
My favorite action figure ever is, I mean, I've talked about this one before, but the one that's sort of like the most symbolic to me is the first Star Wars toy I ever got, which was Dengar, who my neighbor Jeff gave him to me, and I didn't know anything about Star Wars at the time. I was like very, very young, 5 or 6, and hadn't even really seen the movies, and I thought he was like the hero of the films. And he's not. He's in, literally 1.5 seconds in The Empire Strikes Back. He's one of the bounty hunters that Darth Vader's like, get this fucking piece of shit off of my ass.
He's the only visibly human bounty hunter in the lineup in Empire Strikes Back, and he looks like a drunk mummy.
Yeah, he's like, we all always called him like a toilet paper mummy. So that was always one of my favorites growing up. But realistically, it's like Spider-Man toys were always some of my favorites. I think that was it Toy Biz, the first Wolverine they made that had the retractable claws?
The brown costume or yellow costume?
The yellow costume.
Okay, that was the second. The first one.
That was the second. Okay, so I had the brown one too. But yeah, the X-Men ones were some of the first that I ever got really into. So I want to say either him or Gambit from that line were like some of the first ones where I was like, I think I saved up with my own money. Gambit had fucking day one, his stick was like weird and warped and bent, and his cape was like it was a holdover of the Kenner Star Wars capes that like Lando Calrissian and Obi-Wan Kenobi came with. It was like vinyl. And Darth Vader, right? The original Darth Vader toy didn't have like a hard plastic cape or a cloth cape or anything like that. It was just this thick vinyl cape that just looked like a shitty children's raincoat. And Gambit came with that, but his was even worse because it was like this super puffy.
It had like pleats on the side. Like it just had like a large seam along the edges.
It was like the least cool and sexy thing you could put on like the most cool and sexy X-Men, right? And then you give him this bent stick. He didn't even come with playing cards he could throw.
Do you remember his power?
Was it
Gambit, the character who can take any object and charge it with kinetic energy and then throw it and it explodes. And he also is really good at like wielding a pool cue and beating people up with that.
He had a power kick.
He had a kick. He just did like a straight front kick, just pap.
I had to look behind me because I found so I open up all my toys, but over the last few years, I've realized like if I have doubles or something, or like if I'm at a vintage toy store, like a flea market or swap meet or anything like that, and I see like an old ancient carded action figure, still on the card, not necessarily mint or anything like that, still with the bubble on it. I'll buy it and I'll thumbtack it to my wall and I'll look at it. And a lot of the times it's really funny because they'll have like multiple stickers in the corner from the amount of price reductions it got at Toys R Us, which were the orange stickers, or KB Toys, which were the white stickers. It had a little, silhouette of a stamp of a train on it or something like that. And it'll always say like $6 crossed out, $5 crossed out, $2. And like, I'm like, I spent $18 for this in 2021 at a swap meet while I had, a COVID mask on. And so, yeah, I think that's that's probably my favorite action figure because it was one of the first ones I got with my own money that had an action feature that was part of like a thing that I loved, and I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. What about you?
So that's actually funny. I don't think I knew that was going to be your answer, but I'm going to go with the original Toy Biz Deadpool.
Oh yeah.
So like I realized thinking back, like I was obsessed with I was a Deadpool early adopter. Like I was in a Deadpool from like day one. And by day one, I mean he had existed in the Marvel Universe for probably a year and a half at that point. This was like 1993 maybe. Toy Biz hit the ground running. The second X-Men was popular on the cartoon. They were like, we're making action figures based on every possible character. To the point that like I literally had to Google one the other day because some toy collector posted one. There's a dude called Cruel, like Krule, and he's like he's like a magenta dude with orange jorts and a large ponytail, and he has like skulls for some reason. And I was like, I remember this guy from growing up. Who is this character? Who is this guy? And I look him up, and he's like a totally just like Monster of the Week, X-Force character. And X-Force was like a fairly mature Marvel comic as far as like what they were doing at the time. And I don't think he ever showed up on the X-Men animated series, but like. That was the thing is you would buy you'd buy the main characters, you'd buy Wolverine and Cyclops and stuff, and then you'd buy these other characters and be like, I guess they're fighting these dudes this week. I remember seeing Deadpool on the back of the package and being like, Deadpool is the sickest looking character I've ever seen. He looks like if Spider-Man was a ninja and he had a gun and swords. And I was like, yes, totally.
So Cruel has
just to be clear, Cruel is not my favorite character. I just wanted to like shout out how esoteric they would get that quickly.
He's purple with like orange sort of I guess jorts almost.
Yeah, he's got orange jorts.
Yeah, and he's got kind of like the big Thanos gloves, and then he's like a very 90s. Extremely 90s, but his defining trait outside of being bald is that he has like one huge long ponytail that has like a spike ball on the, and it's comically long. It's taller than he is, and you can use it to swing around his head and hurt people. Yeah, he looks like one of those guys that like if you saw him on the shelf, you'd be like, oh, he's clearly the main bad guy from X-Men, right? Because he's formidable. The art on the card is like really big and scary. He comes with these shrunken heads, so you're like, clearly he took his victims and destroyed them. And it's like, no, he's in like a handful of comics and none of the shows.
Yeah, but that was, I mean, they made like everybody. They made like all kinds of, the two like most esoteric toy lines I feel like was the opening lineup for Star Wars Episode 1, where they were like, hey kids, you want an action figure of Terrence Stamp as Chancellor Valorum, everyone's favorite galactic politician? Or what about Shmi Skywalker, Anakin's mom? And it's just like, really? But no, like I feel like the 90s X-Men, which, the toy line, which expanded into like, X-Force and Generation X and all these, weird side stuff. It was just all over the place. And it was a lot of characters that hadn't been established on the cartoon. But at the same time, the cartoon was pulling from what at the time, like 40 years worth of comics and like drawing from all that deep lore. And there was constant comics coming out. So there was a feeling of like, these characters must all have they all must be firmly established. There's definitely like, if you want to dig into it, they have info about them out there. There's stuff to draw on. And like, I remember just seeing Deadpool and being like, I have to learn more about this character and I have to get this action figure. This is the coolest action figure. I never found that action figure everywhere. I had to hunt like far and wide to find that action figure. The way I finally got that figure, and my mom, bless her heart for doing this. We were living in like Boston at the time. We took a trip to New York City for some reason. I can't remember what. And she was like, Let's go to FAO Schwartz. Let's go to like the literal big toy store from the movie Big, like the piano and all that. We went there, and I don't know if we knew about this in advance or if it was just like a stroke of luck, but they had a 4-pack of X-Men figures that included Deadpool. It was Deadpool, a Cable figure, I want to say Forge, and then like Trevor Fitzroy, who's a character I still like. I know X-Men comics pretty well. I still am shaky on what this guy's deal is. He was a dude in like a magenta jumpsuit who had a bad haircut, and he had these like plastic force fields you could put on him. The rest of the figures in the line, I was like, no thanks. But like Deadpool, I love dearly. I love this figure so much. This was my like Cowboy Woody. Like this was my go-to figure that I took with me everywhere I play. I took the coat off of Gambit and put it on Deadpool. Yeah.
Did you like lose your mind when you saw the Deadpool on the shelf?
I honestly don't remember. I think he was actually under. I think they had him in like a plexiglass case, and I think I got so excited I blacked out probably. But when it was one of those things where you had to like go to the front of the store and like ask them to go pick it out. And when I got him, he wasn't actually carded. He came in like a little. It was like a mail away box almost. Like it was like a little. It was like a almost unpackaged set. So like I never got the experience of getting the carded Deadpool with like the the trading card and the art and all that.
You're tapping into like a really specific part of this whole thing that we didn't really talk about, which was that there was a sort of a thrill of the hunt to this stuff.
Oh, 100%, yeah.
Yeah, there was like it it's not as ubiquitous as now where you can just click a button and it shows up at your house, It was, you would go to Toys R Us or you'd go to KB Toys or FAO Schwartz if you were in New York, or Woolworth or whatever, anything you could go to that sold toys. Like you would go to Sears with your dad or your mom or your parents because they had to get like some lawnmower defucker or whatever, and then you'd sneak off to the corner and there was like a little video game section with some box video games, and there was like a little toy aisle. There was like an action figure section. There was toys and dolls and then like all this other nonsense, and they were on these huge racks and they were on cards with a little punch hole in the corner or in the top, and they would go like 10, 12 figures deep sometimes, depending on how thin the actual packaging was. And you would stand there and you would flip through and you would look at the sides of them to try to see like who's back there. Is there like this rare, super rare, Deadpool? Is there like a Boba Fett all the way in the back of this thing? Like, is this Bishop from Aliens? So you'd be flipping through all of them, right? And sometimes you'd take them off the racks and you'd make a little pile on the other boxes underneath, and you'd dig and dig and dig. And if you got lucky, you'd find the toy you were looking for. You'd find something you didn't even know existed, maybe. That was a big part of it. It was like this really big, exciting thrill of just like digging through.
Yeah, that's totally it. Like I think that's sort of the high that I'm still chasing. Like,
yeah.
And again, like the internet broke that. Where like now it's just a matter of pre-ordering fast enough, or like even before being able to get anything instantly on the internet. Like I remember, hardcore toy collectors kind of screwed it up for everybody because again, sometimes scalpers, sometimes just adults who were like quick on the draw. I remember going on like Star Wars collecting websites, and they would be like, this. Here's what's here, like it would be case breakdowns. It would be like, this wave is releasing now. Here's what's in this wave. It'll be 6 of this figure, 2 of this one, the rare chase variant, the hard to find Princess Leia with hologram Comtech reader chip, whatever. This figure, they call it short pack, where it's like this is the one that has the rarest distribution in a wave. This is the one that's in this wave. If you want to try to get this figure, go find this. And it'd be like, here's the SKU, like here's the barcode number. When this arrives in the store, here are the regions of the country where this is rolling out. And like, I feel like I've always had just bum luck in terms of whatever big box store, whatever toy store I'm living near. They're always the ones that don't get anything cool. Like, I don't know why that is, or they're the ones that get the cool stuff. And like, there's enough dorks like me who are there to scoop it up fast enough. But it's like, I just don't have, like, I've never had good luck finding stuff on store shelves.
The case breakdown thing was really weird for me to learn about because it felt like, it was like learning how the sausage was made, but like in a bad way, like it kind of robs some of the magic of things for me to suddenly learn like, okay, so action figures actually come in these like extremely boring brown boxes with big bold typeface on them and like purple or, maroon stripes on them. And, in each one, there are 6 Luke Skywalkers and 4 Chewbaccas and 1 Princess Leia or whatever. And I remember being a kid and being like, all right, so I have Leonardo, Michelangelo, Raphael, Donatello. I have Splinter. I have 1 Foot Soldier. I have Casey Jones. I don't have April O'Neil. I need April O'Neil. And I remember looking in every store and being like, I don't understand. Like, why is she the most sold out figure? And then I got older and I realized, oh, she was probably like the least best selling one or whatever, the worst selling one. So they would only send, or they probably anticipated boys don't want to buy a girl news reporter who comes with a camera and doesn't come with like a katana. So we're only going to send 1 for every 20 we send of the other stuff. And it kind of bummed me out. And so I remember specifically, and I don't know if you did this as a kid, but when I was a kid, me and my brothers had the numbers memorized for Toys R Us, KB Toys, and any other toy stores within 3 towns of us. And we would call them constantly. And I actually did this until like the Game Boy Advance came out, where I was like, hey, do you guys have Mario Kart World Circuit Tour or Circuit Tour, whatever the fuck it was called? We would call up and be like, hey, do you have I'm looking for Boba Fett, or I'm looking for Juggernaut from X-Men. Do you have him? And like, I didn't know at the time how retail worked because I was 8 or whatever, and some high schooler would be like, hold on. And then they'd put me on hold for like 4 minutes and he'd come back and be like, yeah, Juggernaut. Yeah, we have one. And I'd be like, Dad, they have a Juggernaut. And he'd be like, all right, well, we can go tomorrow. And I'm like, if we go tomorrow, some motherfucking kid's going to buy the Juggernaut. You have to take me to get the Juggernaut right now. And he'd be like, do you have any money? And I'd run upstairs and I'd fucking empty out a piggy bank, or like we'd go to the Coinstar machine at the supermarket that took like fucking 10 cents on the dollar or whatever. You dump all these coins in, it would print out a receipt. You take the receipt, bring it to the counter, you'd get like $8 back, loop back around the highway in your car, run into Toys R Us, get the Juggernaut, run out, and just be like the happiest kid in the world. Like it was so different than just the idea of just like clicking a button and it showing up. It wasn't as easy, but there was there was something fun about that. I would say that as adult humans, most of our hunter gathering skills have been filed off.
Yeah, I think this is a clear demonstration of that. But yeah.
Yeah, sure.
But there's that high of like, I got it. Yeah, like I found this.
Yeah.
Like I think you hear collecting and too often that's conflated with like hoarding. It's like
yes.
It's making a hobby of hoarding. It's like I got to get all these things together, but it's less the act of going out and finding it. It's like this tracking down. That's the fun part. Like digging through bins of old toys at flea markets and stuff. Like that's a treat. That's a fun time.
Like
I'm pre-ordering kind of busts things a little bit. Like that like the first action figure I ever pre-ordered. The first thing I ever pre-ordered, period, I had to like beg my mom to let me use her. I don't know if it was a credit card or debit card or just if I had to use like a check or money order or set up PayPal or something. But I pre-ordered what Hasbro was marketing as like the 300th Star Wars figure ever. And it was like in reality, I think I don't know if I think they actually made more or less than that. I forget what the deal is, but it's this 300th edition Boba Fett that came in this like cool window box. And it was effectively the third sculpt of a Boba Fett figure that ever made in that line, which is like, and it was finally like the original Boba Fett figure is very cool. The one from 1979. That's cool.
Yeah.
There was the 1995 or 6 one, which is, makes it look like he's got like everyone is too ripped in that series. So their chests are too big and he just doesn't have a neck and he's got these tiny little legs, weird sculpt. I still love that toy to death.
I think I remember seeing the 300th edition Boba Fett in the, in Star Wars Insider magazine.
Probably. Like it was heavily marketed, and the whole thing there was like the original Boba Fett, it was first advertised as having like a missile launching backpack, and then for safety reasons they canceled that, and it was like always this sort of this white whale. This was delivering on that promise, and it was like, guess what? You can launch a little rocket out of his backpack, and it had like that still is a gorgeous figure. Like it's a really well made toy. It's definitely like splitting that difference between like here is a toy that you can play with, but also it's made for collectors. It came in like a nice window box, just really really clean paint details. It had like a soft goods cape. Cool toy. Love that toy. Pre-ordered that when it was announced, and this was 2001, I want to say, and it felt like the longest wait. And I was at summer camp. I think waiting for it to come out, and I would just go on like websites being like, are there any new pictures of it? I just want to look at pictures of it. The second thing I ever pre-ordered was I had to call up the, I think it was EB Games. This was like later that year. It was for the Metal Gear Solid 2's McFarlane Toys action figures, and I wanted Solid Snake so bad. And McFarlane at the time would have like the most stunning product photos. Like they'd have the most gorgeous, like, sort of like studio models, like, hand painted, like gorgeous. And most of the time the paint ops on those figures were really good. Like they did make really good looking toys. And I was so stoked to get Solid Snake, and I had to call up this, local spot. And I was like, hey, can I pre-order a McFarlane Solid Snake action figure from the MGS2 line that has a street date, blah, blah, blah. And they were like, no, you can only pre-order games. And I was like, I don't have money for games. What are you talking about? And so I just waited until the day it came out. And I was like, frantically called up out of breath. I'm like, do you have Solid Snake? And the little girl was like,
I don't want games. I want the man from the games.
Yeah, I want the man. Give me the little man. And I was like, do you have Solid Snake? And she was like, let me check. And it was like an EB game, so it was like the size of a Payless shoe source. And she's like, walked back like 30 seconds later. Was like, yeah, it's right here. And I was like, oh my god, please hold it, save it for me. And I went to the Santa Rosa Plaza Mall the next day, and went in there, and she had put aside Solidus Snake, not Solid Snake, but Solidus, who's like his secret brother who's got tentacles and a P90 or whatever. And I was like crestfallen, and I went over, and the shelf where they had the Metal Gear Solid action figures was still fully stocked because everybody else there was just buying Metal Gear Solid 2 because they had $60. And I was like, well, I have $9.99. I'll buy this. And I got the Snake figure, and I take it home, and I looked at it, and it looked like my friend's dad. The paint ops on it were just weird. They just did something weird with his beard, and it looked exactly like my friend's dad. And I was like, not sure what to do about this.
So currently in 2024, the only thing resembling a toy store at the Santa Rosa Mall exclusively sells bootleg toys, like exclusive, like Mario with a green hat and stuff like that. So
oh boy.
If you're ever there, you can re-experience the joy of what it's like to get a toy that doesn't look like the thing you wanted. But you bring up a good point. Like pre-orders and mail-aways were sort of the original action figure thing, right? With the early bird special with Star Wars, which they were caught kind of with their pants down in terms of the popularity. Kids wanted toys. They were like, how do we get them to buy it? So they gave them this, IOU effectively, which was this piece of paper that said, hey, you will get a box of Star Wars toys eventually, just not today, but soon it's going to show up. And then historically they were sort of caught with their pants down again when it came to the Baby Yoda stuff with, The Mandalorian, where they were like, we don't have merch available in time for this. And so like a year later, they were like, hey, here's your first Baby Yoda toys. But mail-aways were interesting because I remember specifically one of the first things I ever mailed away for was the clear Predator. And not like a clear Predator like that dude from Beetlejuice, who was clearly a Predator. No, but there was a see-through Predator, right?
Yeah. Again,
Do you know what I'm talking about?
yeah, I know what you're talking about. There's no way to describe that doesn't sound offensive.
No, I know.
Have a seat.
But yeah, there was a whole very popular Predator action figure line. I was super into them. I adored them. They were awesome. And that was an interesting one because it's like I had seen the movies and I'd like, snuck to watch the movies, like if they aired on TV or maybe a friend had it on VHS.
Stealthily hid in the trees and activated your camouflage so you could watch them without getting in trouble.
Exactly. And then Aliens, like I feel like Aliens was more like they seemed more popular at the time. Like it's sort of like a deeper roster there. But for Predator, it was just kind of like, well, there's only one Predator in the movie. And like, how many Predators do you have? And it turns out there was a lot. And not just the guy from Beetlejuice. But yeah, I got the see-through Predator toy. See if I can find it. So, and this is interesting because this is a character that they've like the Reaction toy line has remade him. NECA's remade him. Like, but he was a mail away toy. And I think you got him by like, yeah, he was called the vintage 1993 Kenner Ambush Predator mail-in figure, 5-inch clear action figure. Mail-aways are interesting because they never came on cards. They were, or historically didn't. They would just come in like a white box with like one accessory and a piece of paper. And I thought this was the coolest thing ever. And the thing is, back then, you would mail away for something, and this was like a cereal prize or anything like that, and it would say, please wait 6 to 8 weeks. And I cannot stress enough how much time that is when you're 9 or 10.
Yeah,
or, no,
that's such a long time. Like now, I feel like we're so accustomed. Like if it shows up in more than 2 days, we're like, oh, it took so long. Yeah, but like the equivalent of that is now, like when you pre-order a toy, they announce it doesn't come out for 2 years,
which is so annoying.
You're
like,
oh, this will be out, like Q4 2025 or whatever.
Like, I sent you a thing the other day. Like they're making this. We're both old men with children now, but we both still have this thing in our brain that gets us excited about this stuff. But I sent you they just announced that they're making a like Transformers Ninja Turtle party wagon that turns into a Ninja Turtle. So it's the van that they drive around in, and then it turns into a Ninja Turtle, and it comes with 4 different heads and all their weapons. So you don't have to buy 4 of them. You could if you wanted to pose them, but you could just buy one and be like, today he's Raph, today he's Leo. And I went to click buy on him, and it said like it ships in July, and I was like, you would have had my $50 right this second. I would have bought it right this second, just impulsively, because I have that thing where I'm like, this is the closest I have to being a kid in a store and finding out something exists and it's in my hands and I want to take it up to the counter. But seeing that I won't have it for 4 months or something like that, I was like, I'll pass. But yeah, you would wait weeks and weeks and weeks for these mail away toys, and they would finally show up. Side note, you should have played like pop culture stock market when you were a kid, because like your favorite things were Boba Fett and Deadpool.
Yeah,
and,
because they had cool looking toys. I was like, I want to get the.
They had cool toys, and they didn't. And there wasn't really a ton known about either of them. Like Deadpool had some comic appearances, Boba Fett less so. I guess around then he probably showed up in a few things here and there. But like they eventually went on to get their own shows and movies, and all this stuff.
There's a lot to talk about in the world of action figures because we love action figures because they rule. I feel like we scratched multiple different surfaces and didn't really dig any deeper in a bunch of different directions, but I'd happily talk about any of the toy lines we talked about today for another hour or more.
If you like what we're doing, support our Patreon. It's patreon.com/thisthingrules. Suggest topics to us because we, as you can tell, once we get going, we don't shut up.
And if you want to learn more about the world of action figures, check out The Toys That Made Us on Netflix. That is a wonderful documentary. And, go support your local action figures at the toy store or wherever you get them. Check out Super 7 if you're feeling nostalgic. Or if you hate your wallet and you want there to be more holes in it where the money flies out of it, like that emoji. Anyway, I'm going to go play with some action figures.
Same. So they made a mail-away Mumra?
That's what they used to call me in college, mail-away Mumra.